Hello there, you perfectly lovely little people. My name is Sarah and I'm reading from 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith. Now I will be reading the end of the chapter I was reading last night called Sudden Danger. A cold draught came from the larder. It had been the dairy when Hell Hall was a farm, and there were wooden slats instead of windows. The moonlight, shining in through the slats, made bright stripes on the stone floor. Meat for the puppies' breakfast were already set out in the long troughs because the Badduns hated working in the early morning. There were small troughs for the little pups and big ones for the larger pups. Pongo said to Lucky, "Wait until I get back to your mother. Then, while she and I stand ready to attack the Badduns, march all the pups in here. Tell them no pup is to eat until the last pup has a place at the trough. I will join you then and give the word to start eating." It was remarkable how quickly the pups left the kitchen under Sergeant Lucky's whispered directions. Row after row marched out, like children leaving a school hall after prayers, except that the big pups left first, as they were nearest to the door. Pongo and Missis watched the Badduns anxiously, for the hundreds of little toenails made a on the kitchen floor, and there were a few scuffles, snuffles and snorts, though never even the smallest bark, for the pups guessed their lives depended on their silence. But the Badduns had ears and eyes for nothing but the television. Lucky left his own brothers and sisters to the last, and last of all to leave was the cat pig. She was an intelligent little puppy and quite understood that she had to escape, but oh, how she hated leaving the television. She went out backwards, still staring at the screen. Then Pongo and Missis sped swiftly and silently across the big red kitchen. They looked back from the larder door and saw that the Badduns had not stirred. "How much longer will What's My Crime last?" whispered Pongo.
20 minutes,
said the cat pig promptly and wistfully. Pongo and Missis closed the larder door. The bolt on the inside was low down and easy to manage. Pongo shot it home at once, while the pups looked on admiringly. Every pup had its place at a trough, but not one lick of food had been eaten. 1, 2, 3, feed, commanded Pongo. In 59 seconds flat, every scrap of food had been eaten.
"But what about you and Mother?" said Lucky. "I think I can find the Badduns' Sunday dinner."
He found it on a shelf. 2 steaks, rather poor grade, but Pongo and Missis swiftly ate them. Then Pongo gave troops the right to forage and led a search through the larder. Everything eatable was eaten, the big pups sharing with little pups most fairly. "Anything in that cupboard?" said Pongo at last. "Only coke for the central heating furnace," said Lucky. "Well, the Badduns won't find anything to eat tomorrow, will they?"
"Let them eat coke,"
said Pongo. The entire meal had taken nearly 5 minutes. Pongo now felt he must get his troops out of Hell Hall as fast as possible. There had been no time to think out plans for the future. He was counting on the Colonel's advice. All that could be done now was to lead the pups to the folly. The outer door of the larder was easily opened. Then across the old orchard they went, and in at the door which the Colonel had so thoughtfully propped open. Missis gave one backward glance at Black Hell Hall under the full moon. What would the Badduns do when they found not one pup in the kitchen? There was not room for 97 pups on the ground floor of the folly, nor would there have been in the crowded room upstairs. So Pongo marched everyone out onto the heath. As the last pup marched out, the sheepdog arrived. At first he thought Pongo had recklessly begun the escape too soon, but when he heard the true facts, he praised Pongo highly. And he was particularly pleased that all the pups had been fed before escaping. "That was Sergeant Lucky's idea," said Pongo. "Good work, Sergeant Major," said the Colonel. "But where are we to go?" asked Missis anxiously. "Look, the puppies are shivering." They were indeed, for though it was not freezing, it seemed terribly cold to them after that warm kitchen. The sheepdog looked worried. Not that anyone could see this, as his expression was always hidden by hair. What was he to do? At a moment's notice, with 97 Dalmatian puppies and 2 fully grown Dalmatians. Sorry. At last he said, "Our big barn for the night, anyway. Pups can keep warm in the straw. It's only half a mile across the heath." Half a mile? How little to Pongo and Missis, how much, how terribly much, to the tiny cadpig. After even a few hundred yards, Pongo was in despair after the long journey to London which lay ahead. The big pups ran along happily. The medium-sized pups did quite well. Even most of the smaller pups looked as if they were capable of a reasonably long walk. But the smallest pups of all, Pongo's own family, how were they ever to walk over 70 miles? Lucky, Patch, Roly-Poly, and the other boys struggled along bravely, but the girls stumbled and panted and had to have many rests. As for the cadpig, she would never have reached the farm at all if the sheepdog had not given her a lift. He lay down and she climbed onto his back and held onto his long hair with her teeth. Even so, she nearly slipped off twice. "She could never stay on our smooth backs," said Mrs. de Pongo. "If only I could wheel her in a doll's perambulator." "You couldn't walk to London on your hind legs," said Pongo, "even if we had a perambulator." At last they reached the big barn at the back of the farm where the Colonel lived. The tired pups snuggled into the hay and straw and instantly fell asleep. Pongo, Missis, and the Colonel stood at the door, trying to make plans. The Colonel said, "I can't keep you here long. You would be found. Besides, I couldn't feed so many. We must get you to London by easy stages, just a few miles a day." "But where shall we sleep? Where shall we find food?" said Pongo anxiously. "It will need tremendous organisation," said Colonel. "I hope to arrange the first stage at once by midnight barking. I must bark some distance from the farm or I shall wake my pets." Pongo offered to bark with him, but the sheepdog would not hear of it. "You two must rest. It's now nearly 10 o'clock. If my plan goes well, I shall wake you at 4. Then there will be still over 3 hours of darkness. That will be long enough to get you to the place I have in mind." "But my smallest daughter is so weak," said Missis. "How can she make any journey?" The Colonel smiled. Not that anyone could see that. "I have a plan for the little lass," he said. "Now, sleep, sleep, both of you." So Pongo and Missis went into the dark barn and sniffled out their own family. Only Lucky stirred. He said he was trying to sleep with one eye open so as to be on guard. "You close both eyes," said Missis firmly, and Lucky did, quite happy now his parents were there to take charge. "What would happen if we were found here?" asked Missis. "Surely the people from the farm are kind. They wouldn't hurt us." Pongo had been thinking about this. He guessed that as there had been so much in the papers about himself and Missis and their families, they might all get safely returned to the Dearleys. But the other puppies, what would happen to them? Even the dear, kind Dearleys would not take in 82 puppies they did not know. The poor things would be sent to the police station. Anything might happen to them. But if once the Dearleys saw them, then all the puppies would suddenly belong to the Dearleys, just as they had suddenly seemed to belong to him in the dark kitchen. Somehow, he must get them all to London. Mrs. felt just the same, but she didn't see how the cadpig and some of her sisters would make the journey. "Well, sleep now," said Pongo, giving her a loving lick. "Are you glad you didn't, after all, have to bite a human?" "The Badduns are no more human than Cruella is," said Mrs. "Still, I'm glad I didn't have to soil my teeth." They would not have fallen asleep so easily if they'd known what the sheepdog had just seen. Across the heath, lanterns were moving. The Badduns were out, searching for the missing pups. Well, I hope that you've all had a nice wash, cleaned your teeth, washed your hands, And I hope you're all snuggling up in your bed. Give yourself a great big cuddle. And I will see you tomorrow.